I'm on my second stop here in the Oak Park neighborhood, just west of downtown Chicago. And lo and behold, Carla in the foreground, and behind Carla is the boyhood home of the one and only Ernest Hemingway. I got that right, Carla?
Absolutely.
So this house here, I mean, this was ahead of its time. It was built in 1890, you said. You know, some 30 years for most of the world that had running water, let alone the city that is in the shadows of Oak Park, Chicago, right? This is right after the fire and going into the World's Fair and the rebirth, right?
Absolutely. So in 1890, it had running water, electricity, and a telephone, which was very unusual for 1890.
And one of the rooms that I think stands out on the tour that we walked a little bit beforehand is the dining room. Why don't you explain that story?
Well, Hemingway's parents both were professionals. His mom was a music teacher, so she would be teaching music in the morning, and Dad would be seeing patients because he was a doctor. And so Grandpa was with the kids in the morning, and he liked to tell them stories. And he was apparently a very good storyteller. He would tell them evolving stories with recurring characters, and one of these stories had to do with a pack of dogs that were fierce and agile, and the lead dog was named Carlos. And one day, Hemingway announces to his family, I don't want to be called Ernest anymore. I want you to call me Carlos. And one of the things I like about that story is it gives us some insight into how into the stories that Ernest was, right? So then as the kids get a little bit older, they begin to tell Grandpa stories. And guess which kid is really good at telling stories, right?
Right, yep.
So he can just tell the best stories. And in fact, his grandfather will say to his mother, that boy has an amazing imagination. He's either going to go very far or he's going to end up in jail.
And I'd imagine some of that goes into why he kind of portrayed his life as one way to the public versus what really was reality. Because, I mean, look at this house behind you. It is opulent. It is one of, what did you call this area of Oak Park? What are they?
It's called Quality Hill. So every house around here had to have at least 5 bedrooms. And again, you know, he had electricity and running water and a telephone by 1890. He liked to tell people that he was a rags to riches story. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, he obscured the fact that he actually had an incredibly privileged childhood. And I think this is really the untold story of Ernest Hemingway in many ways, because he had this incredible family that wrapped around him all kinds of information about art and science and music. And he gets all of this from his family and uses this in his art, but he didn't like to acknowledge the fact that he had the start that he did.
Yeah, I mean, just from the stories you hear about, like you said, the rags to riches, and even the influence, you know, there's much been said about Ernest Hemingway and women, but his own mother and grandmother were trailblazers in their own right. I mean, his grandmother went to college during the Civil War.
Absolutely.
His mother, did you say his mother designed another house? Did I get that right?
Yeah, the house that they move into once he leaves this house is a few blocks away. She did the sketches for it, brought in an architect. She was amazing, and she becomes his mother becomes a landscape painter in addition to being a musician. And she had auditioned for the Metropolitan Opera, so she was a world-class musician in that regard. And then his maternal grandmother was a landscape painter, and his paternal grandmother graduated from college in 1867 with a double major in botany and astronomy. That's incredibly early for a woman to have gone to college. So Hemingway had an enormous amount of support and education that really created fertile soil for him to become the writer that he became.
Yeah, and a lot to live up to. You know, I mean, you were telling the story about his dad running down these steps right here, blowing a trumpet when his son was born, and we were up in that room where he was born.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first child was Marceline. 18 months later, Dad is really hoping for a fishing and hunting buddy. And when he sees he's had a boy, the family story is he comes running down the front steps, grabs the trumpet that's on the fireplace, runs out in the front porch and blows the trumpet. So he's partially announcing to his family who lives across the street that his parents, that the baby has been born. But he really confuses the neighbors, because if you had a fire back then, you made a lot of racket, and so the neighbors start showing up with buckets of water, thinking that the house is on fire. But it wasn't.
Nope, just for the birth.
Yeah, just for the birth. And I just think it's amazing. He ends up being this world-class writer, and he's literally heralded in by a trumpet. Like, how does that happen, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, it's an incredible story. And we've talked about how he doesn't like to talk about his childhood, or he didn't like to talk about his childhood, which is why many people might not even know that he was here in Oak Park for 17 years. What other things would you want people to know about the Hemingway house here?
About the Hemingway house. Well,
Hemingway in general.
About Hemingway in general. Yeah, I think, you know, he just had this amazing family, and I think sometimes he tried to obscure that too, because he might have felt a little, even perhaps threatened by him, and so he didn't like to acknowledge he had a father who was a doctor, a mother who was an opera singer, he had painters in his life, and all of these things influenced the writer he becomes. So when he does an interview in the 1950s with Elaine Ross in the New Yorker, he says, I learned how to write landscapes by looking at paintings. That's kind of interesting because his mom ends up being a painter, his grandma was a painter. And he says, I walked through the Luxembourg Museum 100 times with a hungry gut, and I looked at the paintings of Mr. Paul Cézanne. And by looking at those paintings, I learned how to write a landscape. Okay. Similarly with music, in that same interview, he'll say, I use the word and at the beginning of Farewell to Arms consciously, the way Johann Sebastian Bach used a note in music when he was emitting a counterpoint. And so again, he was brought up in this incredible atmosphere of music and art, and that comes through in his own writing, even by his own admission.
Well, incredible stories to be told here. They can come see you,
yes.
Right? What's the best way for people to do that?
They can go onto our website, HemingwayBirthplace.com, and make a reservation for tours on the hour. The tour is an hour long. We'd love to have you come out to Oak Park.
Well, thank you very much. That Hemingway house was fantastic. Eric, you keep the hits rolling, man. Where are we going off to next?
We're going to Pleasant Home, and we're going to meet Teresa.
Teresa at Pleasant Home, and that's just down the street here. So I'm going to start walking, and I'll see you there. How about that? All right, so Eric sent me on my merry way to Pleasant Home. George Maher, architect. I'm here with Teresa to help explain what this gem is. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Tom. Fine, and it is a gem. So Pleasant Home is significant because it is a very early example of prairie architecture. George Washington Maher, isn't known as well as Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, we're just down the street, yet here's another example of prairie architecture, all happening in Oak Park. It's like the Motown of architecture, right?
Yep, you got it. So this is a very early example of prairie architecture. And it is in fact the only George Maher home that's open to the public, so it's very significant.
Yeah, and you talked about earlier, this grand entrance, it's a very unusual way to be greeted, but it is gorgeous and stunning when you walk in that grand entrance way into that main room. Talk about that.
Yes, it is. The art glass windows welcome you to the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, John and Mamie Farson were the owners of the house, and they wanted this house so that they could entertain, sometimes up to 2,000 people. And they had the house built with electricity. They had electricity.
Which is unusual for the time it was built.
Very, very unusual. So you would arrive at the front gates and walk up the stairs to one of their parties, and you'd go inside and you'd be amazed and dazzled by the electric lights, the display of electricity.
And you would hear the music kind of wafting from the room to your right when you walk in. What is that apparatus in there?
That is the violano virtuoso, and that actually was an instrument that was developed by the second owners, the Mills, the Herbert Mills family. Herbert Mills owned the Mills Novelty Company.
Oh, right.
And made coin-operated machines.
Right, and that's what we find on, so the first level here is the free tour, then the upstairs is part of the paid tour where you get into this room with the dining room set, and then just off to your right here from the dining room set is the cornet, some of the examples of some of the machines that family's famous for, right?
Exactly, you've got it, yes.
And what is the dining room significance that we're looking at right here?
The dining room set, with George Maher designed a lot of the furnishings in his home, and he designed the dining room set here at Pleasant Home. It's mahogany. And it is a set for 14 people. One of the captain's chairs was actually sold at some point, and it was found at an auction by someone, recognized it was from Pleasant Home and said, I'm buying it and sending it back to Pleasant Home. So we're very fortunate that we have that.
That's incredible, and people can make a whole day out of all the architectural stops here in Oak Park and throw in the Hemingway Museum for fun just to balance things out a little bit. When you come here, though, it is truly an experience to walk the grounds. I mean, there's this huge, it's like a park that is part of the grounds here. You said, was it 4 acres?
4.5 acres. It took John Farson, the first owner, 16 years to accumulate the land. He bought the first 2 lots in 1892, and then as he bought more lots, he moved the house that was on the lot and include that land in his garden. So 4.5 acres.
And it was a place for the big parties they used to have, a whole thing, right?
Sometimes up to 2,000 people.
I can imagine this space can certainly house all that. For people who want to come to the walking tour or come by, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Okay, every Thursday we are open for free self-guided tours of the first floor. We're open from 11 to 4. And we also give tours of the entire house, first, second, and third floor, on Thursdays, but also you can go to our website, pleasanthome.org, and you can find out how to make arrangements for a tour of the entire house, or a second tour of the servants. We've got a new tour of the servants.
And the ballroom upstairs too, and the billiards.
We take everyone up there. There's a ballroom, billiards room, and the maid's room is up on the third floor. And then we've also developed a new tour of the outside, the grounds of the house.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Teresa. I appreciate it. And that concludes the Around the Neighborhood of Oak Park segment that I'm doing today. I'm going to talk to Eric here in a second just to make sure we top everything off with some websites and all that good stuff. So I'm going to go find Eric right now. I couldn't help but take in one more last shot of Pleasant Home on the sprawling grounds that they have here. Eric has been kind enough to hang out with me all day, give me the shot to talk to all these people and experience this amazing architecture and history here in Oak Park. Where should people go if they want to learn more about Oak Park and visiting and the whole thing?
Yeah, no, for more information or to make a cool day trip, go to visitoakpark.com.
And I imagine it's updated in real time as far as things opening up, festivals being added all summer long, right?
Yeah, no, as things are opening up, we're up to date with all that information for people.
Fantastic. So you heard it there from Eric. Come out to Oak Park. It's wonderful. Check out all this space around me. TBARNAS at WGNTV.com. That's TBarnes at WGNTV.com. If you enjoy the Chicago scene, keep watching. Tell your friends. It's a good time.